My sister called me the family's biggest disappointment. Then federal agents crashed her husband's gala and exposed the secret I'd kept for 15 years. My sister publicly shamed me at our father's birthday dinner, labeling me the family's greatest disappointment. Just months later, federal agents stormed her husband's high-profile gala, and in that sudden, hushed moment, the entire room finally understood the true cost and ultimate purpose of my 15 years of silence. When Director Hayes entered that grand ballroom, it wasn't just the dozen federal agents accompanying him, or the flashing credentials, or even the jazz quartet abruptly silencing mid-note, as if a master switch had been thrown. It was the profound, suffocating quiet that followed him, spreading outward like a wave, washing over the sparkling champagne flutes, the meticulously arranged floral displays, and the 200 guests who had gathered to celebrate a man now on the verge of arrest. I stood near the entrance, a glass of water untouched in my hand. My sister, Valerie, was on stage, her husband, Julian Vance, beside her. My father, Robert, occupied the head table, wearing the familiar expression he always adopted at our family's gatherings, a silent declaration of, "I built this. I earned this. Don't you dare embarrass me." Director Hayes crossed the expansive room with an unhurried, deliberate stride. Agents instinctively straightened as he passed. He didn't spare a glance for Julian, or Valerie, or the banner proudly displaying her image, nor the melting ice sculpture, nor even my father, who had half risen from his chair, clinging to the fragile hope that this was all some misunderstanding. Director Hayes walked directly to me. He stopped, stood tall, and delivered a formal salute so sharp it could have cut glass. "Target secured, Commander Thorne," he announced, his voice cutting through the oppressive stillness. The ballroom held its breath. "Your intelligence was flawless." Valerie's microphone slipped from her fingers, clattering against the marble floor with a startling crack that echoed off every wall. In that moment, my mind drifted back 3 months, to a different dinner table, a different glass of water before me, and my sister's sneering voice, "At least Julian finishes what he starts." And I thought of the 15 years I had kept my mouth shut, and all the things that silence had cost me. It was worth it. Every single second of it. But to truly understand, we must go back. This story didn't begin in a lavish ballroom. It began at a birthday dinner, at a table where crystal glasses never ceased to gleam, and the only question was not if someone would utter a cruel remark, but when. My name is Evelyn Thorne. I'm 33 years old. For the past 11 years, I've dedicated myself to a field I cannot name, for an agency whose complete title I am legally forbidden from ever printing in any public document. I say this not for dramatic effect, but because it is the precise, mundane truth, and the mundane truth, in its essence, is what this entire story is truly about. My family has no idea what I do. They don't know because I've signed agreements that carry federal prison sentences for disclosure. They don't know because the very nature of my work necessitates that almost no one knows. And, most significantly, they don't know because for most of my adult life, it was simply easier to allow them to believe the narrative they had already constructed for themselves. The official Thorne family version of Evelyn was this: she was the younger daughter, the disappointing one, the girl who couldn't even manage basic training at 17, returning home after 3 weeks with no explanation and, seemingly, no future. Her sister, Valerie, in contrast, became a corporate attorney, married Julian Vance, and built a life that our father, Robert Thorne, a retired finance executive, golf club member, and owner of a multi-million-dollar investment portfolio, could proudly boast about at any dinner party. Evelyn, they believed, simply drifted. She floated. She didn't own a home, arrived at family events in unimpressive attire, and responded to questions about her career with vague, half-sentences that only served to solidify everyone's suspicions. I had grown accustomed to it. I had, in fact, made peace with it. Then, Julian began funneling illicit funds through my father's retirement accounts, and I was forced to reevaluate how much peace I was truly willing to live with. The dinner in question was my father's 68th birthday. It was held in the private dining room of the Harrington Club, with 8 family members present, not including the servers who moved through the space with the careful invisibility of people paid handsomely to essentially not exist. Robert Thorne sat at the head of the table. Valerie was to his right, Julian beside her. My Aunt Carol, whom I genuinely adore and who serves as a sort of diplomatic buffer within our family, sat across from me. Near the end, I sat with my glass of water, a deliberate choice, as I never drink at events where I might need all my faculties. Julian had just announced his fund had successfully closed a merger, valued at a staggering $47 million. Everyone applauded. I simply looked at my plate. I had, by that point, been scrutinizing Julian's financial structures for 6 weeks. Not officially, of course. Officially, I was, between assignments. Unofficially, I had contacted an old colleague, Leonard Hayes, who had spent 22 years as a forensic accountant with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network before transitioning to private practice. I had sent him the documents I'd discreetly photographed at my father's estate planning meeting 3 weeks prior, the very papers that had made my stomach drop the moment I first saw them. Leonard spent 10 days meticulously reviewing them. His conclusion, delivered during a 15-minute phone call, was stark and concise: this is a laundering operation. Julian's fund doesn't generate returns, it recycles funds through a complex chain of offshore shell companies, delivering them back cleaned. Whoever's money is in that fund, it's being used as a vehicle. They probably don't know it. Whoever's money was in that fund, my father's money was in that fund. All $28 million of it. Robert Thorne had transferred the bulk of his estate into Julian Vance's investment vehicle 6 months earlier, enthusiastically encouraged by Valerie. This was because Julian was family, because the paper returns looked exceptional, and because my father trusted the people he was supposed to trust. I had tried to warn him. 3 weeks before the birthday dinner, I drove to his house in Halford with a folder containing physical documents, highlighted sections, and a 2-page summary I'd meticulously written myself, explaining the intricate offshore routing structures in plain English. I sat at his kitchen table and walked him through it, page by page, as carefully as I knew how. He didn't read a single word. "You're just jealous of your sister," he'd said, before pointing towards the door. I sat in my car in his driveway for 11 minutes after that, my hands flat on the steering wheel, not shaking, just unnervingly still, the kind of stillness that comes when something you desperately hoped wasn't true clicks undeniably into place. He wasn't going to listen. So, I made a different call. Back at the birthday dinner, my attention returned to Valerie. She noticed I wasn't applauding Julian's announcement. In our family, visible enthusiasm equated to loyalty, and its absence was perceived as aggression. "You've been quiet, Evelyn," she observed. I continued eating. "That's generally what people do," I replied, "when they have nothing interesting to contribute." Polite, artificial laughter rippled down the table. My Aunt Carol discreetly gazed into her wine glass. I offered no further response. It's a technique you eventually master, simply not reacting to things designed specifically to provoke a reaction. You observe the bait. You acknowledge it. Then you set it aside. Valerie never grasped why this tactic didn't work on me, and that failure of understanding only pushed her to try harder, making the bait more obvious, and thus, easier to avoid. "At least Julian finishes what he starts," she said, raising her voice, ensuring the entire table heard. Evelyn couldn't even make it past week 3 of basic training. Instant silence. There it was. My favorite family myth, 15 years old and still circulating. I gently put down my fork. "I didn't fail," I stated calmly, the tone of someone not trying to win an argument, but also unwilling to let a lie go unchallenged. Valerie smiled, anticipating tears, perhaps a dramatic exit. She was already mentally crafting the story she'd share with her friends tomorrow. "I disappeared because I was recruited for Black Ops," I added. She burst into genuine, unguarded laughter, the kind people produce when they believe they've caught someone in a lie so utterly absurd it's almost comical. "You?" She slapped the table, a loud, sharp sound. "Black Ops." My father closed his eyes, the practiced disappointment of a man who had honed the expression for years, no longer needing to consciously think about it. "I raised a winner and a quitter," he said quietly, without opening his eyes. "Stop trying to drag your sister down to your level." I didn't argue. I simply picked up my fork and finished my lamb. People only ever hear what they are prepared to hear. There was no version of that conversation where I could have won. And I didn't need to win that conversation. I needed to win a different one. And I was already 3 weeks into winning it. Let me tell you about the 6 weeks between that estate planning meeting and the birthday dinner, because that's where the real story unfolded, even if from the outside, it looked like nothing at all. Leonard Hayes, the forensic accountant with 22 years at FinCEN, now private, worked out of a 2-room office in Bethesda that seemed untouched since 2003. He was the first person I called after photographing those documents. I'd collaborated with Leonard on 2 previous operations in a purely technical capacity. He was precise, relentlessly paranoid, and utterly incapable of small talk, qualities that made him exceptionally good at his job. These routing numbers, he informed me on the 3rd day, connect to 3 shell entities registered in the Cayman Islands. 2 of them appear in a sealed federal investigation I can't name, but you probably already know about. I did know about it. I won't name it here either. Timeline? I asked. The investigation has been active for 14 months. Based on what you've shown me, Vance's fund became entangled approximately 8 months ago. Your father's capital came in 2 months after that. Which meant my father's money had been an active part of a laundering operation for 6 months. A heavy silence hung between us. Yes, Leonard confirmed. I asked him to document everything. He did. 61 pages, meticulously formatted, cited, and cross-referenced against public financial records and the documents I'd photographed. He emailed it to me as a password-protected PDF, the subject line reading, Technical Analysis. Hayes Financial Forensics Report reference 2209W. That was Exhibit A. Exhibit B came from a woman named Agent Sophia Rossi. Special Agent Sophia Rossi, 11 years with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, currently assigned to a task force I'm also not going to name here. I had worked tangentially with Sophia on an operation in 2019. We weren't friends, precisely, but we were the kind of people who trusted each other with things that truly mattered, which is a bond more valuable than friendship. I reached out through a secure channel and requested a meeting. We met at a coffee shop in Arlington on a Tuesday morning. She was dressed in civilian clothes, sipping something that appeared to be mostly milk. I slid a USB drive across the table, Leonard's report, plus my original photographs. She looked at the drive, then at me. You're not supposed to be involved in domestic financial investigations, she said, her voice low. I'm not involved, I replied. I'm a concerned family member with documents I thought the appropriate authorities should see. She almost smiled. That's a very specific kind of concerned family member. I've been told I'm very specific, I conceded. She took the drive. 12 days later, she called me. Not on my regular phone, but on a number I'd given her for secure contact. Your documents corroborated 3 key elements of an existing investigation, she said. I forwarded the relevant materials to the case team. They will be in touch. Timeline? I asked. Can't say, but Evelyn, the fund is bigger than just your father. A pause. There are 47 other investors. Total capital exposure is north of $90 million. The number landed in my chest like a physical blow. $90 million. 47 other families. The money of 47 people who had trusted Julian Vance because he had a firm handshake, an impeccable haircut, and a wife who wore diamond bracelets and smiled at precisely the right moments. I need to know when it moves, I said. I'll do what I can, she replied. That was the last time I spoke to Sophia before the gala. The weeks between that call and Valerie's charity gala were the hardest of the entire 6 months. Not operationally hard, I've operated in conditions that make a waiting period feel like a vacation. This was personally hard. The kind of hard where you're watching someone you love walk towards something terrible, and you've already done everything you possibly can, and all that's left is to wait, trust the process, and hope the process moves faster than the damage. My father called me 4 times during those weeks, twice to discuss Julian's fund, which was still showing extraordinary returns on paper, once to ask if I was attending Valerie's gala, and once, at 11:30 on a Wednesday night, just to talk. We spoke for 40 minutes about nothing in particular, his golf game, a documentary he'd watched, a new restaurant he wanted to try. He sounded content, even happy. I sat on the phone, listening to my father be happy, and thought, he doesn't know. He has no idea that in some conference room somewhere, federal agents are looking at documents with his name on them. He has no idea that the money he worked 40 years to accumulate is currently passing through shell accounts in the Caribbean, I didn't tell him. I couldn't. Not because of legalities this time, but because telling him would have altered his behavior, and altered behavior was observable. Observable changes could compromise an active investigation, allowing Julian to move funds, alert co-conspirators, and simply disappear. I had already witnessed what happened when I tried to tell him with a folder, highlighted pages, and plain English. He had pointed to the door. So, I went to Valerie's gala. The Sterling Crest Hotel ballroom was designed to seat 300. On the night of the gala, it held 212 people, a figure I knew because I had arrived early and, out of habit, counted. Banners featuring Valerie's photograph hung from the ceiling. She was being honored for her contributions to a childhood literacy foundation, which, whatever else was true, was real. The jazz quartet played well. The champagne was better than it needed to be. I was standing near the entrance when Valerie found me. Glad you came, she said, sounding about 40% sincere. You invited me out of courtesy, I replied. You never disappoint in that regard. A smile, clearly practiced in mirrors, touched her lips. Nobody expects anything from you. I nodded, taking a small sip of my water. Julian crossed the room towards the stage at 8:15. He moved with the assured energy of a man fully inhabiting his own myth, shoulders back, hand extended to every person he passed, radiating the kind of practiced warmth that costs nothing and buys everything in rooms filled with people desperate to believe in something. At 8:22, Valerie gestured for me from the stage. A public test. A final, exquisite humiliation. The Thorne family tradition of using audiences as leverage. She extended the microphone. I looked at it, then at her. No, her smile flickered. Come on, Ev. Just say a few words. No, Julian stepped off the stage. He moved towards me with the specific body language of a man who uses physical proximity as a dominant signal. Close enough to be uncomfortable. His voice low enough that only I could hear. You are a pathetic nobody, he hissed. You should be grateful we even let you through the door. I looked at him, then at Valerie, then at my watch. 8:29 p.m. Right on schedule. You're out of time, Julian, I said. His face performed a complicated dance, confusion, then irritation, then the early flickers of something that looked very much like fear, though he didn't yet understand why. Then the ballroom doors opened. 12 federal agents in coordinated formation. Dark suits, credentials prominently displayed, moving with the kind of deliberate, unhurried precision that comes from knowing every variable has already been accounted for, every exit covered, and the only task left is execution. The jazz quartet stopped mid-song. Every champagne glass in the room froze. The lead agent, Agent Miller, 13 years with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, a man I recognized from a briefing photograph Sophia had included in one of her messages, moved directly towards the stage. He wasn't searching, wasn't scanning the room for his target. He already knew precisely where to go because I had provided them with the seating chart 3 days earlier, along with the ballroom's floor plan. Julian's color drained from his face in stages. First his cheeks, then his forehead, then something behind his eyes. Valerie actually laughed, a nervous, disbelieving sound. There must be some mistake, she stammered. Nobody answered her. Agent Miller reached the stage. He didn't climb it, he simply stopped at its base, positioning himself in a way that made it physically clear. Julian Vance would not be stepping off that stage in any direction other than the one they specified. Mr. Julian Pewitt, he announced, loud enough for the entire room, do not leave your current position. The warrant was read aloud. Federal charges, financial crimes, money laundering, conspiracy to defraud investors. Each count landed in that room like something heavy dropped from a great height. Between counts, you could distinctly hear the ice sculpture melting. My father slowly rose from the front table. His wine glass, containing a specific burgundy he'd ordered for the occasion, I'd overheard him mention it on the phone, slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor. I watched his face. I have done difficult things in my professional life. I have been in situations that required a specific kind of stillness, where everything depended on your ability to feel nothing until you were somewhere safe enough to feel it. I had practiced that stillness for a very long time. But watching my father's face in that moment, watching 68 years of certainty fold into something small and frightened, was the hardest thing I have done since my mother's funeral. He looked at Julian. He looked at the agents. He looked at Valerie, whose composure was finally, genuinely cracking, not the practiced crack of a woman performing vulnerability, but the real thing, ugly and uncontrolled. Then the crowd parted. Director Hayes entered the ballroom. I had met Director Hayes twice before, both brief encounters. Silver-haired, in an unremarkable suit, with a face that expressed nothing in particular, not authority, not warmth, not menace. He simply was the most authoritative person in any room he entered, much like a fulcrum is the most important part of a lever without looking like anything special. He had been director of the relevant agency for 9 years. He was the person I had ultimately reported to, through about 7 layers of intermediary, on the operation that had just concluded. He was also not required to be there. He came anyway. He crossed the ballroom without looking at Julian, without looking at Valerie, or my father, or the 200 shell-shocked guests. He walked with the unhurried certainty of a man who has already decided exactly where he is going. And that destination was a woman in a plain dark dress, standing near the entrance, with a glass of water she hadn't touched. He stopped in front of me. The ballroom was so silent I could hear my own breathing. He stood straight and delivered a crisp, formal salute, the kind that signifies something specific, that carries rank and recognition and the acknowledgement of work done under conditions that could not be acknowledged any other way. Target secured, Commander Thorne. He let it land. Your intelligence was flawless. Valerie's microphone hit the marble floor. And my father who had pointed at his door, who had told me I was trying to drag my sister down to my level, who had spent 15 years perfecting the expression of practiced disappointment, sat back down into his chair as if the bones had suddenly left his body. I could see it happening in real time. The birthday dinner. The documents he'd refused to read. The folder with the highlighted pages. Every dismissal, every assumption, "you're just jealous of your sister." All of it arriving at once, recontextualized, rearranged into something his 68-year-old understanding had to completely rebuild from the foundation. The daughter he'd called a quitter had just saved everything he owned. I'll tell you what happened after, because people always want to know. Julian Vance was arrested that night. He was remanded without bail, given the flight risk assessment. The subsequent federal indictment named 11 co-conspirators across 3 countries. The Cayman shell entities were frozen within 72 hours. Of the $90 million in investor funds identified by the task force, forensic accountants, Leonard Hayes among them, officially brought in as a consultant, recovered approximately $74 million through asset seizure. My father's $28 million was among the funds recovered in full. Valerie retained a defense attorney 2 days after the arrest. She was not charged. After 14 months of investigation, the task force concluded she had no direct knowledge of the fund structure. I believe that's probably true. Valerie is many things, but she loved my father in the blunt, competitive way our family expressed love, and I don't believe she would have knowingly exposed his retirement to federal seizure. She was used by Julian the same way the other 47 investors were used, just more personally, more completely. She called me 6 weeks after the arrest. It was the first time she'd reached out. I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened to the voicemail 4 times, standing in the kitchen of my apartment, and I called her back. She cried. I let her. I didn't cry because I'd already done that privately, through a sequence of nights I don't particularly care to describe in detail. I told her I was sorry it happened. I told her I tried to warn her. She said she knew. She said she was sorry. I said I knew. We have spoken 6 more times since then. It is careful and strange, and I don't know what it will eventually become. It's possible it becomes nothing. It's possible it becomes something better than what we had before, which was a relationship built on the assumption that she was the winner and I was the failure. At minimum, it becomes something honest. I'll take honest. My father called me the day after the arrest, at 7:14 in the morning. He didn't say much for the first minute. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, the particular quality of silence that belongs to someone who has an entire architecture of words they want to say, but can't locate the entrance to any of them. Finally, he said, "How long?" 11 years, I replied. Roughly. And you couldn't tell me? No. I tried once, with the documents. But operationally, no, I couldn't. Another silence. The training, he said. The 3 weeks. You were pulled out? Recruited. For a specialized program? The cover story was that you'd quit? Yes. Why didn't you fight it? Why didn't you? He stopped. I heard him swallow. You let me believe you'd failed for 15 years. Yes. Why? I thought about that question. I'd thought about it a lot over 15 years, in the abstract, as a hypothetical. What would I say to him if I could explain? And now that I was actually being asked, the answer was simpler than any of the versions I'd rehearsed. Because the work mattered more than what you thought of me, I said. And because I thought you knew me well enough to know I wouldn't just quit. I was wrong about that. A long silence. I'm sorry, Evelyn, he said. I didn't say it was fine. It wasn't fine. Some things are true and not fine simultaneously. And pretending otherwise doesn't help anyone. I know you are, I said instead. We talked for another 20 minutes about the fund, about the recovery process, about his lawyers and the federal briefing he'd been given by Agent Miller. He asked careful questions and listened to the answers. He sounded like a man who had decided to stop performing certainty. At least for now. At least with me. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in 15 years. Maybe in my entire life. 3 months later, I stood in my kitchen at 6:45 on a Tuesday morning, drinking the first coffee of the day, reading a brief I'm not going to describe on a secure tablet I'm also not going to describe. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Julian Vance pleads guilty to federal money laundering charges. Sentencing scheduled for March. I set the phone face down on the counter. Outside, it was raining. The kind of steady, gray, uncomplicated rain that doesn't perform anything, it just falls because that's what rain does. I finished my coffee, then picked up the phone, opened my contacts, and called Leonard Hayes. He answered on the second ring, which meant he was already at his desk, which meant it was before 7 a.m. in Bethesda, which tracked. Saw the news, he said. Yeah. 61 pages, he mused. I didn't know if it would hold. It held, I said. Your father's assets fully recovered. Silence, then, good. That was the whole conversation. Leonard is not a man who believes in using more words than necessary, which is one of the things I respect most about him. I hung up and stood at the kitchen window, watching the rain. 15 years is a long time to carry something quietly. It leaves marks you don't notice until you're standing somewhere still enough to truly look at them. Small architectural changes to the way you hold yourself, the way you accept what people think of you, the way you stop expecting to be understood and start simply expecting to be useful. I don't know if those marks ever truly go away. I don't think that's really the point. The point is that when it mattered, when my father's money, and 47 other families, and something I had built very carefully over 11 years all converged in one room, I was in the right place, with the right information. And I had done the work precisely enough that a man who doesn't salute easily had saluted me, in front of 200 people. The daughter they called a quitter.